Chapter 11. How to use faith in healing. Is religious faith a factor in healing? Important evidence indicates that it is. There was a time in my own experience when I was not convinced of this, but now I am, and that very definitely. I have seen too many evidences to believe otherwise. We are learning that faith, properly understood and applied, is a powerful factor in overcoming disease and establishing health. My conviction regarding this important question is shared by many medical men. Newspapers carried an account of the visit to this country of the famous Viennese surgeon, Dr. Hans Finsterer. I quote the newspaper story, which was headed, "Honor Surgeon Guided by God." A Viennese doctor, Dr. Hans Finsterer, who believes the unseen hand of God helps make an operation successful, was selected by the International College of Surgeons for its highest honor, Master of Surgery. He was cited for his work in abdominal surgery with the use of local anesthesia only. Finsterer, 72-year-old professor at the University of Vienna, has performed more than 20,000 major operations, among them 8,000 gastric resections, removal of part or all of the stomach, using only local anesthesia. Finsterer said that although considerable progress has been made in medicine and surgery in the past few years, all advances are not sufficient in themselves to ensure a happy outcome in every operation. In many instances, he said, in what appeared to be simple surgical procedures, the patients died, and in some cases where the surgeon despaired of a patient, there was recovery. Some of our colleagues attribute these things to unpredictable chance, while others are convinced that in those difficult cases, their work has been aided by the unseen hand of God. Of late years, unfortunately, many patients and doctors have lost their conviction that all things depend on the providence of God. When we are once again convinced of the importance of God's help in our activities, and especially in the treatment of our patients, then true progress will have been accomplished in restoring the sick to health. So concludes the account of a great surgeon who combines his science with faith. I spoke at the National Convention of an important industry. It was a large gathering of the leaders in an amazingly creative merchandising enterprise that has established this particular industry as a vital factor in American business life. I was somewhat surprised when one of the leaders of this organization at the convention luncheon, where the discussion centered around taxation, rising costs, and business problems, turned to me and asked, "Do you believe that faith can heal?" There are a good many well-authenticated examples on record of people who have been healed by faith, I answered. Of course, I do not think we should depend on faith alone to heal a physical ailment. I believe in the combination of God and the doctor. This viewpoint takes advantage of medical science and the science of faith, and both are elements in the healing process. Let me tell you my story, the man continued. A number of years ago, I had a malady that was diagnosed as osteoma of the jaw. That is, a bone tumor on my jaw. The doctors told me it was practically incurable. You can imagine how that disturbed me. Desperately, I sought for help. Although I had attended church with fair regularity, still I was not a particularly religious man. I scarcely ever read the Bible. One day, however, as I lay in my bed, it occurred to me that I would like to read the Bible, and I asked my wife to bring one to me. She was very surprised, for I had never before made such a request. I began to read and found consolation and comfort. I also became a bit more hopeful and less discouraged. I continued to read for extended periods every day. But that wasn't the chief result. I began to notice that the condition which had troubled me was growing less noticeable. At first, I thought I imagined this. Then I became convinced that some change was taking place in me. One day, while reading the Bible, I had a curious inward feeling. of warmth and great happiness. It is difficult to describe, and long ago I got over trying to explain the feeling. From that time on, my improvement was more rapid. I went back to the doctors who had first diagnosed my case. They examined me carefully. They were obviously surprised and agreed that my condition had improved, but warned me that this was only a temporary respite. Later, however, upon further examination, it was determined that the symptoms of osteoma had disappeared entirely. Still, the doctors told me it would probably start all over again. This did not disturb me, for in my heart I knew that I was healed. How long has it been since your healing? I asked. 14 years was the answer. I studied this man. Strong, sturdy, healthy. He is one of the outstanding men in his industry. The incident was told to me in the factual way that a businessman would recount it. There was not the slightest indication of doubt in this man's mind. Indeed, how could there be? For whereas he had been condemned to death, here he was alive and vigorous. What did it? The skillful work of the physician, plus. And what was the plus? Obviously, the faith that heals. The healing described by this gentleman is but one of many similar accounts, and so many of them are attested by competent medical evidence that it seems we must encourage people to make greater use of the amazing power of faith in healing. Sadly, the healing element in faith has suffered neglect. I am certain that faith can and does work what we call miracles, which are in truth the operation of spiritually scientific laws. There is a growing emphasis in present-day religious practice which is designed to help people find healing from the sicknesses of mind, heart, soul, and body. This is a return to the original practice of Christianity. Only in recent times have we tended to overlook the fact that for centuries, religion carried on healing activities. The very word pastor derives from a word meaning the cure of souls. In modern times, however, man made the false assumption that it is impossible to harmonize the teachings of the Bible with what is called science, and so the healing emphasis of religion was abandoned almost entirely to materialistic science. Today, however, the close association of religion and health is increasingly recognized. It is significant that the word holiness derives from a word meaning wholeness, and the word meditation, usually used in a religious sense, closely resembles the root meaning of the word medication. The affinity of the two words is startlingly evident when we realize that sincere and practical meditation upon God and His truth acts as a medication for the soul and body. Present-day medicine emphasizes psychosomatic factors in healing, thus recognizing the relationship of mental states to bodily health. Modern medical practice realizes and takes into consideration the close connection between how a man thinks and how he feels. Since religion deals with thoughts and feeling and basic attitudes, it is only natural that the science of faith should be important in the healing process. Harold Sherman, author and playwright, was asked to revise an important radio presentation with the promise that he would be contracted as the permanent writer. After some months of work, he was dismissed and his material used without credit. This resulted in financial difficulty and humiliation. The injustice rankling in his mind developed into a growing bitterness against the radio executive who had broken faith with him. Mr. Sherman declares that this is the one time in his life when he had murder in his heart. His hatred made him subject to a physical affliction in the form of a mycosis, a fungus growth which attacked the membranes of his throat. The best medical attention was secured, but something in addition was required. When he gave up his hate and developed a feeling of forgiveness and understanding, the condition gradually corrected itself. With the aid of medical science and a new mental attitude, he was healed of his affliction. A sensible and effective pattern for health and happiness is to utilize the skills and methods of medical science to the fullest possible extent, and at the same time apply the wisdom, the experience, and the techniques of spiritual science. There is impressive evidence to support the belief that God works through both the practitioner of science, the doctor, and the practitioner of faith, the minister. Many physicians join in this point of view. At a Rotary Club luncheon, I sat at a table with 9 other men, one of them a physician who had recently been discharged from military service and had resumed his civilian practice. He said, "Upon my return from the army, I noticed a change in my patients' troubles. I found that a high percentage do not need medicine but better thought patterns. They are not sick in their bodies so much as they are sick in their thoughts and emotions. They're all mixed up with fear thoughts, inferior feelings, guilt, and resentment. I found that in treating them, I needed to be about as much as a psychiatrist as a physician. And then I discovered that not even those therapies helped me fully to do my job. I became aware that in many cases the basic trouble with people was spiritual, so I found myself frequently quoting the Bible to them. Then I fell into the habit of prescribing religious and inspirational books, especially those that give guidance in how to live. Directing his statements to me, he said, "It's about time you ministers began to realize that in the healing of many people, you too have a function to perform. Of course, you are not going to overlap on the work of the physician any more than we shall intrude on your function, but we doctors need the cooperation of ministers in helping people find health and well-being." I received a letter from a physician in an upstate New York town who said 60% of the people in this town are sick because they are maladjusted in their minds and in their souls. It is hard to realize that the modern soul is sick and to such an extent that the physical organs pain. I suppose in time, continues the doctor, that ministers, priests, and rabbis will understand this relationship. The physician was kind enough to say that he prescribes my book, A Guide to Confident Living, and other similar books to his patients and that noteworthy results have been achieved thereby. The manager of a Birmingham, Alabama bookstore sent me a prescription form made out by a physician of that city to be filled not at a drugstore but at her bookstore. He prescribes specific books for specific troubles. Dr. Carl R. Ferris, formerly president of the Jackson County Medical Society of Kansas City, Missouri, with whom I had the pleasure of appearing on a joint health and happiness radio program, declared that in treating human ills, the physical and spiritual are often so deeply interrelated that there is often no clearly defined dividing line between the two. Years ago, my friend Dr. Clarence W. Lieb pointed out to me the effect on health of spiritual and psychiatric problems, and through his wise guidance, I began to see that fear and guilt, hate and resentment, problems with which I was dealing, were often closely connected with problems of health and physical well-being. So profoundly does Dr. Lieb believe in this theory that he, with Dr. Smiley Blanton, inaugurated the Religio Psychiatric Clinic, which for years has ministered to hundreds at the Marble Collegiate Church in New York. Dr. William Seaman Bainbridge and I worked closely together in the relationship of religion and surgery, and we were able to bring health and new life to many. Two of my medical friends in New York, Dr. Z. Taylor Berkowitz and Dr. Howard Westcott, have been of inestimable help in my pastoral work through their wisely scientific and yet deeply spiritual understanding of the ills of the body, mind, and soul as related to faith. We have discovered the psychosomatic cause of high blood pressure as some form of subtle, repressed fear, a fear of things that might happen, not of things that are, says Dr. Rebecca Beard. They are largely fears of things in the future. In that sense, therefore, they are imaginary, for they may never happen at all. In the case of diabetes, it is grief or disappointment, which we found uses up more energy than any other emotion, thereby exhausting the insulin which is manufactured by the pancreas cells until they are worn out. Here we find the emotions involved in the past, reliving the past and not being able to go forward into life. The medical world can give relief in disorders like these. They can give something that can lower the blood pressure when it is high or raise it when it is low, but not permanently. They can give insulin, which will burn up more sugar into energy and give the diabetic relief. These are definite aids, but they do not offer complete cure. No drug or vaccine has been discovered to protect us from our own emotional conflicts. A better understanding of our own emotional selves and a return to religious faith seem to form the combination that holds the greatest promise of permanent help to any of us. The answer, Dr. Beard concludes, is in the healing teachings of Jesus. Another efficient woman physician wrote me of her own development in combining the therapy of medicine and faith. I became interested in your straightforward religious philosophy. I had been working at top speed and getting tense, irritable, and at times beset with old fears and guilt. In fact, in need of a release from morbid tension. At a low moment, early one morning, I picked up your book and began to read it. This was the prescription that I needed. Here was God, the great physician, with faith in him as an antibiotic to kill the germs of fear and render useless the virus of guilt. I began to practice the good Christian principles outlined in your book. Gradually, there came a release of tension, and I felt relaxed and happier, and I slept well. I quit taking vitamin and pep pills. Then, she adds, and this is what I want to emphasize, I began to feel that I wanted to share this new experience with my patients, those who came to me with neurosis. I was surprised to find how many had read your book and others. The patient and I seem to have a common ground to work on. It has been an enriching experience. To talk about a faith in God has become a natural and easy thing to do. As a doctor, she adds, I have seen a number of miraculous recoveries due to divine aid being given. In the past few weeks, I have had an additional experience. My sister had to undergo a serious operation about 3 weeks ago. Following the operation, she developed an intestinal obstruction. On her 5th day, she was very critically ill, and as I left the hospital at noon, I realized that she must take a turn for the better very soon, or her hope of recovery would be slim. I was very worried, so I drove slowly around for about 20 minutes praying for a relief of this obstruction. Everything that could be done medically was being taken care of. I had not been home more than 10 minutes when the phone rang, and her nurse told me that the obstruction had relieved itself and that she had taken a definite turn for the better, and since that time she has recovered completely. Could I feel otherwise than that God's intervention had saved her life? So runs the letter of a successful practicing physician. In the light of this viewpoint, based on a strictly common sense scientific attitude, we may approach the phenomenon of healing through faith with credibility. If I did not believe sincerely that the faith factor in healing is sound, I would certainly not develop the point of view contained in this chapter. Over a period of time, I have received from many readers and radio listeners, as well as from my own parishioners, accounts of the healings in which the element of faith has been present. I have meticulously investigated many of these to satisfy my own mind as to their truthfulness. Also, I wanted to be able to declare to the most cynical that here is a way of health, happiness, and successful living, which is so buttressed by evidence that only the person who wants to remain ill because of some subconscious will to fail attitude will ignore his possibilities for health implied in these experiences. The formula which these many incidents together present is briefly stated. The employment of all the resources of medical and psychological science combined with the resources of spiritual science. This is a combination of therapies that can surely bring health and well-being if it is the plan of God for the patient to live. Obviously, for each of us, there comes a time for this mortal life to end. That is, life itself never ends, only the earthly phase of it. We in the so-called old time old line churches have, in my humble judgment, missed one of our greatest possible contributions by failing to point out with positiveness that there is a sound message of health in Christianity. Failing to find this emphasis in the church, group, organization, and other spiritual bodies have been created to supply this deficiency in Christian teaching. But there is no longer any valid reason why all the churches should not recognize that which is authenticated, namely that there is healing in faith, and more generally offer sound healing techniques to our people. Fortunately, everywhere today throughout our religious organizations, thoughtful, scientifical minded spiritual leaders are taking that extra step of faith based on the facts and the scripture, and are making available to the people as never before the formulas of the marvelous healing grace of Jesus Christ. In all of the investigations I have made into successful cases of healing, there seem to be certain factors present. First, a complete willingness to surrender oneself into the hands of God. Second, a complete letting go of all error, such as sin in any form, and a desire to be cleansed in the soul. Third, belief and faith in the combined therapy of medical science in harmony with the healing power of God. Fourth, a sincere willingness to accept God's answer, whatever it may be, and no irritation or bitterness against His will. Fifth, a substantial, unquestioning faith that God can heal. In all of these healings, there seems to be an emphasis upon warmth and light, and a feeling of assurance that power has passed through. In practically every case that I have examined, in one form or another, the patient talks about a moment when there was warmth, heat, beauty, peace, joy, and a sense of release. Sometimes it has been a sudden experience, other times a more gradual unfolding of the conviction that the healing has occurred. Always in my investigation of these matters, I have waited for elapsed time to prove that the healing is permanent, and those cases which I report are not based on any temporary improvement, which might conceivably be the result of a momentary resurgence of strength. For example, may I relate a healing experience written for me by a woman whose reliability and judgment I profoundly respect. Documentation in this case is thoroughgoing and scientifically impressive. This woman was told that an immediate operation was necessary to remove a growth which had been diagnosed as malignant. I quote her exact words: "All precautionary treatments were taken, but the manifestations returned. As may be expected, I was terrified. I knew further hospital treatments were futile. There was no hope, so I turned to God for help. A very consecrated and spiritual child of God helped me by prayer to realize that the right knowledge of God and His healing, Christ would help me too. I was most receptive to this kind of thinking and placed myself in God's hands. I had asked for this help one morning, as usual, and spent the day going about my household duties, which were many at that time. I was preparing the evening meal, all alone in the kitchen. I was aware of an unusually bright light in the room and felt a presence against my whole left side, as though a person were standing very close beside me. I had heard of healings. I knew prayers were being offered in my behalf. So I decided this must be the healing Christ who was with me. I decided to wait until morning to be sure if the symptoms of the trouble were gone. Then I would know. By morning, the improvement was so noticeable, and I was so free in my mind that I was certain and reported to my friend that the healing had taken place. The memory of that healing and the presence of Christ are as fresh in my mind today as then. That was 15 years ago, and my health steadily improved until I am in excellent condition now. In many hard cases, the therapy of faith, a quiet, serene faith in Jesus Christ, undoubtedly stimulates healing. People who experience a heartbreak, who thereupon thoroughly and completely practice faith in Christ's healing grace, observing at the same time the rules prescribed by their physicians, report remarkable recovery histories. Perhaps such a person may even gain a greater degree of health than previously for having learned his limitations and realizing the excess strains he has been placing upon himself now conserves his strength. But more than that, he has learned one of the greatest techniques of human well being, that of surrendering himself to the recuperative power of God. This is done by consciously attaching himself to the creative process through mentally conceiving of recreative forces as operating within himself. The patient opens his consciousness to the tides of vitality and recreative energy inherent in the universe, which have been barred from his life through tension, high pressure, and other departures from the laws of well being. An outstanding man suffered a heart attack about 35 years ago. He was told that he would never be able to work again. The orders were that he must spend much of his time in bed. He would likely to be an invalid the remainder of his days, which days would be relatively few in number, so he was informed. It is doubtful whether such statements would be made to him in present-day medical practice. At any rate, he listened to these dire prophecies about his future and considered them carefully. One morning he awakened early and picked up his Bible and by chance, or was it by chance, opened it to the account of one of the healings of Jesus. He also read the statement, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13 verse 8. It occurred to him that if Jesus could and did heal people long ago, and that if he is the same as he was then, why couldn't he heal today? Why cannot Jesus heal me? He asked. Then faith welled up within him. Therefore, with simple confidence, he asked the Lord to heal him. He seemed to hear Jesus say, Believest thou that I can do this? And his answer was, Yes, Lord, I believe that you can. He closed his eyes and seemed to feel the touch of the healing Christ upon his heart. All that day, he had a strange sense of rest. As the days passed, he became convinced that there was a rising tide of strength within him. Finally, one day he prayed, Lord, if it is your will, tomorrow morning I'm going to get dressed, go outside, and within a few days I'm going back to work. I put myself completely in your care. If I should die tomorrow as a result of the increased activity, I want to thank you for all the wonderful days I have had. With you to help me, I shall start out tomorrow and you will be with me all day long. I believe I will have sufficient strength. But if I should die as a result of this effort, I will be with you in eternity, and all will be well in either case. In this calm faith, he increased his activities as the days passed. He followed this formula every day for the entire period of his active career, which numbered 30 years from the date of his heart attack. He retired at 75. Few men I had known have been more vigorous in their undertakings or have made a greater contribution to human welfare. Always, however, he conserved his physical and nervous strength. It was invariably his habit to lie down and rest after lunch, and he never allowed himself to get under stress. He was early to bed and early up, always employing rigorous and disciplinary rules of living. In all his activities, there was an absence of worry, resentment, and tension. He worked hard but easily. The doctors were right. Had he continued according to the debilitating habits of his earlier life, he would probably have long since been dead or at least an invalid. The advice of the physicians brought him to the point where the healing work of Christ could be accomplished. Without the heart attack, he would not have been mentally or spiritually ready for healing. Another friend of mine, a prominent businessman, suffered a heart attack. For weeks he was confined to his bed, but presently returned to his important responsibilities where he now accomplishes all that he ever did previously, but with much less tension. He seems to possess a new power that he did not enjoy before. His recovery proceeded from a definite and scientific spiritual approach to his health problem. He had competent physicians and followed their directions explicitly, which is an important factor in such situations. In addition to the program of medication and treatment, however, he worked out a spiritual healing formula. He outlined it as follows, writing from the hospital. An intimate friend of mine, only 25 years old, was brought into the hospital with an attack similar to mine and died within 4 hours. 2 acquaintances of mine had suffered a similar fate in rooms nearby. It must be that I have work yet to do, so I shall return and apply myself to the task before me with the expectation of living longer and more abundantly than I might have done without this experience. The doctors were wonderful, the nurses grand, the hospital ideal. He then proceeds to outline the technique of spiritual convalescence which he employed. The formula consists of 3 parts. 1. During the first stages, when absolute rest was demanded, I heeded the admonition of the psalmist. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46 verse 10. That is to say, he completely relaxed and rested in the hands of God. 2. As the days grew brighter, I used the affirmation, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Psalm 27 verse 14. The patient put his heart under the care of God, and God placed his hand of healing upon his heart and renewed it. 3. Finally, with the return of strength came a new assurance and confidence to which I gave expression in the affirmation, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Philippians 4 verse 13. In this he affirmed positively that strength was being conferred upon him, and in so doing he received new power. In this 3-point formula, this man found healing. The able ministrations of his physicians conserved and stimulated the healing forces of his physical being. The equally wise application of faith completed his recovery by stimulating the spiritual powers within his nature. The 2 therapies together draw upon the 2 great renewal forces within our life, one of the recuperative power of the human body, and the other the restorative forces resident within the mind. One responds to medical treatment, the other to the faith treatment, and God presides in both areas. He made both body and mind, and he established the processes of health and well-being governing both. In him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17 verse 28. In the prevention of sickness and in healing mind and body, do not fail to draw upon one of the greatest resources available to you. That is the faith that heals. In the light of the principles outlined in this chapter, what can you do of a constructive nature when a loved one or you are ill? Following are 8 practical suggestions. 1. Follow the advice of a prominent medical school head who said, in sickness, send for your minister even as you send for your doctor. In other words, believe that spiritual forces as well as medical technique are important in healing. 2. Pray for the doctor. Realize that God uses trained human instrumentality to aid his healing powers. As one doctor has put it, we treat the patient and God heals him. Pray, therefore, that the doctor may be an open channel of God's healing grace. 3. Whatever you do, do not become panicky or filled with fear. For if you do, you will send out negative thoughts and therefore destructive thoughts in the direction of your loved one when he requires positive and healing thoughts to assist him. 4. Remember that God does nothing except by law. Also remember that our little materialistic laws are only fragmentary revelations of the great power flowing through the universe. Spiritual law also governs illness. God has arranged 2 remedies for all illness. One is healing through natural laws applicable by science, and the other brings healing by spiritual law applicable through faith. 5. Completely surrender your loved one into the hands of God. By your faith, you can place him in the flow of divine power. There is healing there, but in order for it to be effective, the patient must be completely released to the operation of God's will. This is difficult to understand and equally difficult to perform, but it is a fact that if the great desire for the loved one to live is matched with an equally great willingness to relinquish him to God, healing powers are amazingly set in motion. 6. It is also important that harmony prevail in the family, that is a spiritual harmony. Remember, the emphasis in the scripture, Matthew 18 verse 19 says, "If two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven." Apparently, disharmony and disease are akin. 7. Form a picture in your mind of the loved one as being well. Visualize him in perfect health. Picture him as radiant with the love and goodness of God. The conscious mind may suggest sickness, even death, but 9 out of 10 times of your mind it is in the subconscious. Let the picture of health sink into the subconscious, and this powerful part of your mind will send forth radiant health energy. What we believe in the subconscious, we usually rather get. Unless your faith controls the subconscious, you will never get any good thing, for the subconscious gives back only what which your real thought is. If the real thought is negative, the result will also be negative. If the real thought is positive, you will get positive and healing results. 8th and final, be perfectly natural. Ask God to heal your loved one. That is what you want with all your heart. So ask Him, please, to do it. But we suggest that you say please just once. Thereafter, in your prayer, thank Him for His goodness. This affirmative faith will help to release deep spiritual power and also joy through reassurance of God's loving care. This joy will sustain you, and remember that joy itself possesses healing power. Chapter 12. When vitality sags, try this health formula. A woman, so I have heard, went into a drugstore and asked for a bottle of psychosomatic medicine. Such medicine, of course, is not found on drugstore shelves, for it does not come in pills or bottles. But there is a psychosomatic medicine just the same, and many of us need it. It is a prescription compounded of prayer, faith, and dynamic spiritual thinking. It has been variously computed that from 50 to 75% of present-day people are ill because of the influence of improper mental states on their emotional and physical makeup. Therefore, such a medicine is of great importance. Many people who are below par will find that there is a health formula which, in addition to the services of their physicians, can be of great value to them. The manner in which spiritual and emotional treatment can restore declining vitality is illustrated by the sales manager referred to us by the head of a large company. This sales executive, formerly a man of outstanding efficiency and energetic driving power, experienced a serious decline both in ability and energy. He lost his creative skill. Previously, his sales ideas had been unique and outstanding. It soon became noticeable to his associates that this sales manager was slipping badly. He was urged to consult a doctor, and the company sent him to Atlantic City for a rest and later to Florida for a second attempt at recovery. Neither of these vacations seemed to be productive of any definite improvement. His physician, who knew about our religio psychiatric clinic, recommended to the company president that this sales manager come to us for an interview. The president asked him to come, which he did, but he was rather indignant at being sent to a church. "This is a pretty pass," he fumed. "When they send a businessman to a preacher, I suppose you are going to pray with me and read the Bible," he said irritably. "I wouldn't be surprised," I answered, "for sometimes our trouble lies in an area where prayer and the therapy of Bible can have an important effect." He proved most sullen and uncooperative until finally I was forced to say to him, "I want to tell you bluntly that you had better cooperate with us or you're going to be fired." "Who told you that?" he demanded. "Your boss," I replied. "In fact, he says that unless we can straighten you out, as much as he regrets it, you're going to be through." You never saw such a stunned expression on anybody's face. "What do you think I ought to do?" he stammered. "Often," I replied, "a person gets into the state in which you find yourself because the mind is filled with fear, anxiety, tension, resentment, guilt, or a combination of all of them. When these emotional impediments accumulate to a certain weight, the personality cannot support them any longer and gives way. Normal sources of emotional, spiritual, and intellectual power become clogged up. So a person becomes bogged down by resentment, by fear, or by guilt. I do not know your trouble, but I would suggest that you think of me as a sympathetic friend with whom you can be absolutely confident, and that you can tell me about yourself. I emphasized that it was important he conceal nothing and that he completely empty himself of whatever fears, resentments, or guilt feelings might be in his mind. I assure you that our interview will be held in strictest confidence. All your company wants is to have you back, the same highly efficient person you were. In due course, the trouble came out. He had committed a series of sins, and these had involved him in a complicated maze of lies. He was living in fear of exposure, and all in all, it was a most pathetic mass of inner confusion. It came little short of mental filth. It was rather difficult to get him to talk, for he was essentially a decent person and had a strong sense of shame. I told him that I understood his reticence, but that this operation had to be performed and that it could not be accomplished without a thorough mind emptying. When it was all over, I shall never forget the manner in which he reacted. Standing on his feet, he began to stretch. He stood on tiptoes, reaching his fingers toward the ceiling, and then took a deep breath. My, he said, I feel good. It was a dramatic expression of release and relief. Then I suggested that he pray and ask God to forgive him and to fill him with peace and cleanness. Do you mean for me to pray aloud? He asked dubiously. I never did that in my life. Yes, I said. It is a good practice and will strengthen you. It was a simple prayer, and as best as I can recall it, this is what he said. Dear Lord, I have been an unclean man, and I am sorry for the wrong I have done. I have poured it all out to my friend here. I now ask you to forgive me and to fill me with peace. Also make me strong so that I will never repeat these actions. Help me to be clean again and better, lots better. He went back to his office that very day. Nothing was ever said to him, and it did not need to be, for soon he got back into stride and is one of the best sale managers in his city today. Later I met his president, who said, I don't know what you did to Bill, but he is certainly a ball of fire. I did nothing. God did it, I replied. Yes, he said. I understand. Anything he is the old time Bill. When this man's vitality sagged, he tried a health formula that restored him to normal efficiency. He took some psychosomatic medicine which cured him of an unhealthy spiritual and mental condition. Dr. Franklin Iba of the University of Colorado Medical School maintains that one-third of all cases of illness in general hospitals are clearly organic in nature and onset. One-third are a combination of emotional and organic, and one-third are clearly emotional. Dr. Flounders Dunbar, author of Mind and Body, says, it is not a question of whether an illness is physical or emotional, but how much of each. Every thoughtful person who has ever considered the matter realizes that the doctors are right when they tell us that resentment, hate, grudge, ill will, jealousy, vindictiveness are attitudes which produce ill health. Have a fit of anger and experience for yourself that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, that sense of stomach sickness. Chemical reactions in the body are set up by emotional outbursts that result in feelings of ill health. Should these be continued either violently or in a simmering state over a period of time, the general condition of the body will deteriorate. In speaking of a certain man whom we both knew, a physician told me that the patient died of grudgitis. The physician usually felt that the deceased passed away because of a long-held hatred. He did his body such damage that his resistance was lowered, the doctor explained, so that when a physical malady attacked him, he did not possess the stamina or renewing force to overcome it. He had undermined himself physically by the malignancy of his ill will. Dr. Charles Minor Cooper, San Francisco physician, in an article entitled Heart to Heart Advice About Heart Trouble, says, "You must curb your emotional reactions. When I tell you that I have known a patient's blood pressure to jump 60 points almost instantaneously in response to an outburst of anger, you can understand what strain such reactions can throw upon the heart. One who is quick on the trigger," he wrote, "is likely to blame someone else impulsively for a fault or a mistake, when it would be wiser simply to avoid being so much disturbed by what is done and therefore unavoidable." He quoted the great Scottish surgeon John Hunter. Dr. Hunter had a heart condition himself, and a thorough understanding of the effect of strong emotion on his heart. He said that his life was at the mercy of anyone who could annoy him. And in fact, his death resulted from a heart attack caused by a fit of anger when he forgot to discipline himself. Dr. Cooper concludes, "Whenever a business problem starts to vex you or you begin to get angry, let yourself go limp all over. This will dissipate your mounting inner turmoil. Your heart asks that it be permanently housed in a lean, cheerful, placid man who will intelligently curb his physical, mental, and emotional activities." So, if you are under par, I suggest that you do a very scrupulous job of self-analysis. Honestly ask yourself if you are harboring any ill will or resentment or grudges, and if so, cast them out. Get rid of them without delay. They do not harm anybody else. They do no harm to the person against whom you hold these feelings, but every day and every night of your life they are eating at you. Many people suffer poor health not because of what they eat, but from what is eating them. Emotional ills turn in upon yourself, sapping your energy, reducing your efficiency, causing deterioration in your health, and of course, they siphon off your happiness. So we realize today the effect of thought patterns upon physical states. We realize that a person can make himself ill by resentment. We know he can develop various kinds of physiological symptoms because of a sense of guilt. Also, one may show definite physical symptoms as a result of fear and anxiety. We know that healing has been accomplished when the thoughts are changed. Recently, a diagnostician told me of a young woman who was admitted to the hospital with a temperature of 102 degrees. She had a definite case of rheumatoid arthritis. Her joints were badly swollen. In order to study the case thoroughly, the doctor gave her no medication except a slight sedative to relieve the pain. After 2 days, the young woman asked the doctor, "How long will I be in this condition and how long must I remain in the hospital?" "I think I must tell you," replied the physician, "that you will probably be in the hospital for about 6 months." "You mean it will be 6 months before I can get married?" she demanded. "I am sorry," he said, "but I cannot promise you anything better than that." This conversation took place in the evening. The next morning, the patient's temperature was normal and the swelling was gone from her joints. Unable to account for the change, the doctor observed her for a few more days, then sent her home. In a month, she was back in the hospital in the same condition as before. Temperature 102, joints swollen. Counseling disclosed that her father insisted that she marry a certain man who would be an asset to him in his business connections. The girl loved her father, wanted to do as he wished, but did not want to marry a man whom she did not love. So her subconscious mind came to her assistance and in effect gave her rheumatoid arthritis and a temperature. The doctor explained to the father that if he forced this marriage, his daughter would become an invalid. When told that she need not go through with the marriage, the girl's recovery was quick and permanent. Do not get the idea that if you have arthritis, you are married to the wrong person. The incident merely illustrates the profound effect of mental pain on physical conditions. I was interested to read a statement by a psychologist that infants can catch fear and hatred from people around them more quickly than they can catch measles or other infectious diseases. The virus of fear may burrow deeply into your subconsciousness and remain there for a lifetime. But, adds the psychologist, fortunately, infants can also catch love and goodness and faith and so grow up to become normal, healthy children and adults. In an article in the Ladies' Home Journal, Constance J. Foster quotes Dr. Edward Weiss of Temple University Medical School in a speech to the American College of Physicians, in which Dr. Weiss stated that chronic victims of pains and aches in the muscles and joints may be suffering from nursing a smoldering grudge against someone close to them. He added that such persons unusually are totally unaware that they bear a chronic resentment. To clear up any possible misunderstanding, the author continues, it is necessary to state emphatically that emotions and feelings are quite as real as germs and no less respectable. The resultant pain and suffering of diseases caused primarily by the emotions are no more imaginary than those caused by bacteria. In no case is the patient consciously to blame for developing the disease. Such persons are not suffering from any disease of the mind, but rather from a disorder of their feelings, often linked to a marital or parent-child problem. In this same magazine article, the story is told of a certain Mrs. X who came to the doctor's office complaining of a breaking out on her hands, which was diagnosed as eczema. The doctor encouraged Mrs. X to talk about herself. It developed that she was a very rigid person. Her lips were thin and unyielding. She was also rheumatoid. The doctor sent Mrs. X to a psychiatrist who saw at once that there was some irritating situation in her life, which she was translating outwardly in the form of a skin rash, thus taking out on her own person the urge to scratch something or person. The doctor finally put it to her bluntly. What is eating you? He asked. You're peeved at something, aren't you? She stiffened up like a ramrod and marched right out of the office. So I knew I'd hit the target too closely for comfort. A few days later, she came back. Due to the agony of the eczema, she was ready to let me help her, even if it meant she had to give up a hate. It turned out to be a family row. Over a will with Mrs. X, feeling she had been treated unfairly by a younger brother. When she got rid of the hostility, she got well, and when she made up the quarrel with her brother, within 24 hours the eczema vanished. That there is even a relationship between emotional disturbance and the common cold is indicated by Dr. L. J. Sowell of the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, who has made a study of this subject. Emotional disturbances are believed to affect the blood circulation in the linings of the nose and throat. They also affect glandular secretions. These factors make the mucous membranes more susceptible to attack by cold viruses or germ infection. Dr. Edmund P. Fowler, Jr. of Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons stated, there are colds which develop in medical students at the time of their examinations and colds which develop in persons before or after a trip. Colds develop in housewives when they must care for a large family, and one often sees a cold develop in a patient when his mother-in-law comes to live in the house, and it often disappears when she leaves. Dr. Fowler does not specify the effects on the mother-in-law of a daughter-in-law or son-in-law. Perhaps she has a cold also. One of the cases Dr. Fowler reports concerned a 25-year-old sales girl. When she visited his office, her nose was stuffy, the lining was red and congested, and she suffered from a headache and a mild temperature. These symptoms had persisted for nearly 2 weeks. Questioning disclosed that they had started a few hours after a violent quarrel with her fiancé. Local treatments cleared up the cold, but the young woman was back in a few weeks with another attack. This time the trouble had started after an argument with the butcher. Again, local treatments brought relief, but the girl continued to have recurring colds, and each time they were traced to a fit of anger. Finally, Dr. Fowler was able to persuade the girl that her bad temper was at the root of her chronic cold symptoms. When she learned to lead a calmer existence, her sneezes and sniffles disappeared. And yet, people still think that when the Bible tells you not to hate or to get angry, that it is theoretical advice. The Bible is not theoretical, it is our greatest book of wisdom. It is filled with practical advice on living and on health. Anger, resentment, and guilt make you sick, modern physician tells us, which proves once again that the most up-to-date book on personal well-being is the Holy Bible, neglected by so many or regarded by them as purely a religious book and certainly as one that is not practical. No wonder more copies are read than all other books. That is because in this book we discover not only what is wrong with us but how to correct it as well. Dr. Fowler calls attention to the emotional colds suffered by children who feel insecure. He reports that many cases of chronic colds occur in children who come from broken homes. An older child often has recurring respiratory infection when a new baby is born because he feels neglected and jealous. A 9-year-old boy had an extremely dictatorial father and an indulgent mother. The conflict between the strictness of one parent and the lenience of the other obviously was disturbing to the child. He particularly feared punishment by his father. This boy suffered for several years from continuous coughs and sniffles. It was noted that the cold disappeared when he went to camp, away from his parents. Since irritation, anger, hate, and resentment have such a powerful effect in producing ill health, what is the antidote? Obviously, it is to fill the mind with attitudes of goodwill, forgiveness, faith, love, and the spirit of imperturbability. And how is that accomplished? Following are some practical suggestions. They have been used successfully by many in counterattacking, especially the emotion of anger. A consistent application of these suggestions can produce feelings of well-being. 1. Remember that anger is an emotion, and an emotion is always warm, even hot. Therefore, to reduce an emotion, cool it. And how do you cool it? When a person gets angry, the fist tends to clench, the voice rises in stridency, muscles tense, the body becomes rigid. Psychologically, you are poised to fight. Adrenaline shoots through the body. This is the old caveman hangover in the nervous system. So, deliberately oppose the heat of this emotion with coolness, that is, freeze it out. Deliberately, by an act of will, keep your hands from clenching. Hold your fingers out straight. Deliberately reduce your tone, bring it down to a whisper. Remember that it is difficult to argue in a whisper. Slump in a chair or even lie down if possible. It is very difficult to get mad lying down. 2. Say aloud to yourself, "Don't be a fool. This won't get me anywhere, so skip it." At that moment, it may be a bit hard to pray, but try it anyway. At least conjure up a picture of Jesus Christ in your mind and try to think of him mad just as you are. You can't do it, and the effort will serve to puncture your angry emotions. 3. One of the best techniques for cooling off anger was suggested by Mrs. Grace Ursula. She formerly employed the usual count to 10 technique, but happened to notice that the first 10 words of the Lord's Prayer worked better. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. When angry, say that 10 times and your anger will lose its power over you. 4. Anger is a great term expressing the accumulated vehemence of a multitude of minor irritations. These irritations, each rather small in itself, having gathered force by reason of the one being added to the other, finally blaze forth in a fury that often leaves us abashed at ourselves. Therefore, make a list of everything that irritates you, no matter how inconsequential it may be or how silly each is. List it just the same. The purpose in doing this is to dry up the tiny rivulets that feed the great river of anger. 5. Make each separate irritation a special object of prayer. Get a victory over each, one at a time. Instead of attempting to destroy all of your anger, which, as we have pointed out, is a consolidated force, snip away by prayer each annoyance that feeds your anger. In this way, you will weaken your anger to the point where presently you will gain control over it. 6. Train yourself so that every time you feel the surge of anger, you say, "Is this really worth what it is doing to me emotionally? I will make a fool of myself. I will lose friends." In order to get the full effect of this technique, practice saying to yourself a few times every day, "It is never worth it to get worked up or mad about anything." Also affirm, "It isn't worth it to spend $1,000 worth of emotion on a 5-cent irritation." 7. When a hurt feeling situation arises, get it straightened out as quickly as possible. Don't brood over it for a minute longer than you can help. Do something about it. Do not allow yourself to sulk or indulge in self-pity. Don't mope around with resentment thoughts. The minute your feelings are hurt, do just as when you hurt your finger. Immediately apply the cure. Unless you do so, the situation can become distorted out of all proportion. So put some spiritual iodine on the hurt at once by saying a prayer of love and forgiveness. 8. Apply grievance drainage to your mind. That is, open your mind and let the grievance flow out. Go to someone you trust and pour it out to him until not a vestige of it remains within you. Then forget it. 9. Simply start praying for the person who has hurt your feelings. Continue this until you feel the malice fading away. Sometimes you may have to pray for quite a while to get that result. A man who tried this method told me that he kept account of the number of times he needed to pray until the grievance left and peace came. It was exactly 64 times. He literally prayed it out of his system. This is positively guaranteed to work. 10. Say this little prayer. May the love of Christ fill my heart. Then add this line. May the love of Christ insert the other's name, flood my soul. Pray this, mean it, or ask to mean it, and you will get relief. 11. Actually take the advice of Jesus to forgive 70 times 7. To be literal, that means 490 times. Before you have forgiven a person that many times, you will be free of resentment. 12 and finally, this wild, undisciplined, primitive urge in you, which flames to the surface, can be tamed only by allowing Jesus Christ to take control. Therefore, complete this lesson by saying to Jesus Christ, "Even as you can convert a person's morals, so now I ask you to convert my nerves. As you give power over the sins of the flesh, so give me power over the sins of the disposition. Bring my temper under your control. Give me thy healing peace in my nervous system as well as in my soul." If you are beset by temper, repeat the above prayer 3 times every day. It might be advisable to print it on a card and put it on your desk or above the kitchen sink or in your purse.